This is Andrew Wicklund with Project Risk Consultants. We're going to go over the third step of risk analysis, which is the schedule check within Primavera Risk. So making this a 7-step process, we've gone through, we've imported the file, we've validated the data. Now we're ready to actually look at whether or not this schedule is risk ready. So what we're going to do is go into the reports menu, and we're going to look at the schedule check options. Now the schedule check options will go through what each check is. In terms of using this screen, real simple, real easy. I can select all checks. If I uncheck this, it deselects everything. And I can go through the list and select only the checks I want. So most of them don't have that many options. You'll look, and I've got some that I've got an extra box where I can edit the information, so I only want to look for lags longer than a certain amount of days. So we're going to select all the checks, and we're going to go from top to bottom on why is it checking for this. First of all, constraints. Checks for constraints because constraints override logic. So if you have a hard constraint like a must finish on date, or even a soft constraint like a finish on or after, it's not going to allow things to move. Now, just because a constraint is checked, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means, hey, look, this is an issue. It's a common misconception that if something shows up on this, you have to clean it. And I think sometimes between a risk analyst and a scheduler and a PM, there's confusion about this, and it leads to some headbutting. This is saying it's flagging it because it's a possible issue. Constraints should be used in your schedule, and they should be used correctly. But we try and use soft constraint types like finish on or after to hold float instead of the hard constraints like the must dates. Out of sequence logic by default, by definition, is wrong. It's broken logic. It will calculate, it will do progress overrides and what have you, but it's not a best practice. It's an admission that your schedule logic isn't in line with reality and the way the job is being worked. So you really should resequence things so they are as you're going along. It happens a lot though, as schedulers are very busy. So once again, it's an indicator that, hey, things should be cleaned up there. Negative lags it checks for. Negative lags has become one of the big bad words in industry. A rule of thumb on lags, whether it's negative or positive, the bigger they are, the scarier they are. A lag, all it is an absence of logic. So a little negative lag or a little positive lag can't hurt you that much. A big positive lag or a big negative lag can do a lot of damage, because those are representing who knows what. Is it a bunch of activities that maybe should have been risk loaded? Is it a period of time we're waiting? What is that lag representing? So it's important to justify what your lags mean, and the longer they are, the scarier they start to get. But when people avoid using negative lags and they start doing things like start-to-start links with a huge lag, or different types of creative logic because they don't want things to show up on a schedule check, the problem with doing that is when you look at a negative lag then, if the finish of an activity was driving something, and now you've resequenced it to a start link, but the start isn't actually driving the activity, your logic is now wrong. When a Monte Carlo ripples out, the end of an activity increasing will not move the next activity. So your logic is flat wrong at that point. There's no justifying the way you've linked it. So if you cannot use negative lags, it's important to do something else, like maybe putting in some kind of ladder logic, maybe breaking the activity and doing things in such a way where you break the activity in 2 parts and link it properly. Even though that creates more activities, if the end of an activity drives something, you cannot use a start link. It's not actual logic, and the Monte Carlo is going to see that. So positive lags, it'll look at all your lags. Once again, it's not saying they're wrong. It's saying, hey, look at me, I'm a lag. Start to finish links, they work as expected. Very few reasons start to finish links are ever used. They're really not proper logic, or there's not many scenarios where they're actually useful. Sometimes they're used to hold reporting dates instead of doing a finish to start with a as late as possible. People will do a start to finish so the activity hangs there. If they're not hurting anything, I maybe wouldn't force them to be fixed, but at the same time, a lot of times what happens is you've got an inexperienced scheduler or maybe an engineer who's not used to a scheduling tool and put all their finish start links as start to finish links because they were doing their logic backwards from a finish date. It's actually a pretty common problem. My mechanical completion is 2 months from now. I'm going to do all my activities start to finish backwards so the Gantt chart looks correct. Well, when you're doing a Monte Carlo analysis, that's not going to work. Links to or from summary tasks, that's another one. This links to and from summary tasks, it's not proper. It works. You can't do it in Primavera. You can do it in Microsoft Project. It will work as expected. If that's what you want to do, you really would have to justify that for an audit, or you might be in trouble there. Lags longer than a certain number of units. As I said before, the bigger the lag, the scarier it is to me. One of the big ones here is open-ended activities. Open-ended activities can really derail an analysis. The Primavera Risk Tool checks for things that Primavera P6 does not check for. It looks at open ends differently, and this is critical. Primavera looks for a predecessor and a successor only. What Primavera Risk is doing is looking at the actual end of the activity. So if I look at two activities, this first task has a predecessor, it has a successor. Primavera P6 would see this as a close-ended activity. A lot of people who do Microsoft Project would also look at that as it's close-ended. When you're talking about an open-ended activity, look at the end of this activity. It's completely open. So if this activity increases in duration, once again, it's not going to affect this guy. So if it's another one of those issues. If I had done a start to start plus 15 or something like this, or we'll do a 5. If this one increases in duration, it's not pushing this out. So it's another one where it's not really a proper logic. It's not probably what you're trying to do. So it can be an issue right there. So I'd keep that in mind and try and be as good as possible with your open ends. A lot of P6 schedulers will say, oh, my schedule's perfect. They bring it into Primavera Risk, finds a lot of open ends. It's real critical that these things are tied up, because when the bars start moving and the Monte Carlo ripples things out, that could be a huge issue. Lags between different calendars, it shows you that because the way different scheduling tools handle, what calendar will the lag be on. So that's an important thing to know. And this last one is the duration uncertainty distribution shape. Basically, it's showing you how skewed your risk distribution is. So if you said my minimum is 5 days, my most likely is 6 days, and my maximum is 30 days, it's going to see there's a lot of risk on that activity. And it's helping you identify areas where there may be a risk event. So if I got a duration like that, I would say, well, how could a 6-day duration turn into 30 days? Oh, well, we've got a permit issue. Oh, so you're telling me there's not that much uncertainty. There's actually some uncertainty, but there's a risk event. Well, what's the chance that we have a problem with that permit? And then I can pull that risk event off, and maybe it's a 5 to 7 day uncertainty with a 20-day risk event, or whatever the case may be. The next tab at the top, so here's my checklist. This is what I want to check for. I'll look at all checks. Then you've got your rationale. This is kind of what I just went over. This is in my words, but this is what the Pertmaster team has put together on why is it checking for each thing. You can edit these and it'll show up on the report, and it explains to people, well, why are you checking for negative lags? Why are you checking for these things? So I can type these in and it'll show up on the report as well if I check mark this button. Then I've got some options here. So do I want to view the full report, check all tasks, all that. So once you're done with this, you're ready to run the risk analysis or the schedule check and actually see what's going on in your file.